don't think I was ever taught how to practice, or rather, how to be a practicing musician. I began playing music as an 8-year-old after my grandparents gifted me a guitar. And as I continued playing and picking up new instruments throughout my school years, the kinds of music I played or how I practiced was mostly dictated by my whims. So I would learn songs that I liked. My teachers would help me work on things outside of my immediate interests. And eventually I was motivated to learn certain songs and techniques to play music with other people. I was naive about practice at the time, and I didn't really have a deep understanding of what it meant to be a practicing musician or how to structure my learning effectively. At 18, I was a new fan of saxophonist Bob Reynolds of John Mayer and Snarky Puppy. Having a budding YouTube channel, Bob offered to send voice messages answering subscriber questions. I asked Bob for practice advice on jazz saxophone, to which he responded, learn tunes and transcribe solos. And this became my first intentional practice goal. Shortly after receiving this advice, I came across Michael Brecker's infamous 1984 masterclass at University of North Texas. In the Q&A, Brecker is asked about how he approaches practice and briefly speaks about keeping a practice log, which I found out in researching this video has actually been published since, and it's very interesting. If you want to take a look, I'll link it. Being a fan of Brecker, I decided to try it out for myself. I wrote this advice from Bob Reynolds on the first page of a composition notebook to serve as a sort of practice mantra, learn tunes and transcribe solos. And in the following pages, I kept notes of each practice session, including my warm-ups, transcriptions, tunes, and even the amount of minutes I practiced, which proved to be like the most unhelpful piece of all of those. Looking back, this was a pivotal moment in my development as a musician. The act of documenting my practice not only helped me stay accountable, but also allowed me to see patterns in my learning process. This taught me that being intentional about practice was just as important as the practice itself. As I continued in my pursuit, musical objectives began to stack up, and my progress became much murkier. As a senior in college, this is what a day of my practice regimen looked like. I would warm up with top tones for saxophone. I would do a saxophone embouchure exercise for my professor. I would do some long tones. I would play the closé etudes for saxophone. I would transcribe lines and solos for my classes and private lessons. I would be learning 2 to 3 new tunes per week for repertoire class. I would need to review past tunes from repertoire class. I would be practicing tunes for my jazz combos. I was in 1 or 2 each semester. I would also be practicing the charts for the big bands, of which I was also in 2. I was learning doubles, so I'd be doing harmonics and overtones on flute and clarinet, some Rose etudes for the clarinet, and the Taffanel etudes for the flute. So from my freshman to my senior year, my practice goals went from 2 to 12. And as a college student with an abundance of practice time, I was actually able to get most of this done, but there was an inevitable fall off. There were some days where I could only get 2 to 3 of those things done, and the more obvious transition from college to the working world where I really couldn't manage to do most of those things. I can also confidently say I retained so much more with my initial 2 goals than I ever did when I had a dozen in front of me. And looking back now, about a decade later, I practice and approach practice very differently. I understand good practice to simply be the organized and intentional pursuit of a musical goal. The following method offers a structured approach to designing a practice routine that both aligns your musical aspirations and your practical constraints. Step 1. Take a moment to reflect. This is the intention piece from my earlier definition of good practice. Essentially, this step encourages you to exercise a bit of self-reflection on your mindset, priorities, and bandwidth. Let's begin with reflecting on your mindset. In reflecting on my own development, along with the development of my students, I have found there to be 3 common mindsets among most musicians. First, the free spirit. I practice because I enjoy music. This mindset is characterized by pure enthusiasm and exploration. Like a child discovering their first instrument, the free spirit approaches music with wonder and curiosity. They practice what interests them, learn songs they love, and are driven by the simple joy of making music. While this approach sometimes lacks structure, it maintains the essential spark that drew them to music in the first place. Second up is the formalist. I practice because I wish to be great. This mindset is focused on technical mastery and improvement. They often have a structured practice routine, specific goals, and measure progress through achievements like performances or exams. This mindset is crucial for developing discipline and expertise, but can sometimes lead to burnout if it's not balanced with the joy of playing. Third up is the devotee. I practice because I wish to serve the music. This perspective transcends personal achievement. The musician understands that practice is about honoring the art form and contributing meaningfully to the musical tradition. So this practice focuses on deeper understanding, interpretation, and the ability to communicate through their instrument. They balance technical maintenance with artistic growth, and it's always grounded in service of the music itself. Now, there is no correct mindset to fall into, and I can personally say I've found myself in each of these mindsets throughout my development. I would even venture to say you need a healthy balance of each to move through long periods of musical growth. Next up, you'll want to reflect on your priorities. There's a few steps to do this. First, I would write out 3 to 5 I statements about your current musicianship and stay as neutral as possible. Think about it like a doctor conducting an annual health assessment. Here are some examples. I can play major scales in all 12 keys, but not all at the same speed. I have a good tone on my instrument, but I have a hard time keeping it at soft volumes. I can improvise in most keys, but feel more limited in E and B major. Next up, write out 3 to 5 I statements about your musical aspirations. Consider the following questions. What are you genuinely interested in? What speaks to your soul and would feed you spiritually to know deeply? What are your social music goals? Is there a jam you've wanted to start going to? Are there common tunes that would help facilitate your entrance into that type of environment? Are you hoping to form or join a group? Last up, we want to reflect on our bandwidth. Take a moment to sit down with your calendar and determine a realistic practice schedule. Try to remove your ambition and emotions from this and simply see what options are available to you. The amount of time you have is not a measure of how good you can get, but rather what you can realistically take on. In learning any new material, repetition is crucial. That being said, it would be better to have 4 days in a week that you could practice for 5 to 10 minutes than to have 2 days that you could practice for an hour. Step 2, prepare your practice plan. First, I want you to write out a practice mantra. Treat it like a yoga mantra. Keep it simple and affirmative, like my earlier example of Learn Tunes, Transcribe Solos. For broader musical skills, consider language like improve my tone or strengthen my time. Once you have a mantra, write it down in the beginning of a practice notebook. You will revisit this monthly, so it doesn't need to be perfect, just a general idea of what you want to work on. Next, schedule your practice sessions. This can be done in a written planner or even in your phone calendar. That's what I do. As of late, I've been sitting down on Sunday evenings to schedule my practice for the week ahead. This works well for me because at that point I have a firm idea of my teaching schedule, important projects, and other work that will also require a lot of attention. And I can schedule accordingly. You want to consider things like your energy levels and other commitments. I personally have struggled to practice after a long day of work or after a social gathering, especially when things like drinks and other indulgences are involved. Then you're going to want to create one or multiple practice feeders. It is a major bummer to have the time to practice and sit down and realize you have finished your previous tasks, haven't chosen any new ones yet, and now need to spend that valuable time determining what's next. Having feeders, whether they be a list of pieces you want to learn, a playlist of recordings you want to transcribe bits of, or a stack of technique books you want to dive into, will make sure that you have productive sessions. Here are a couple feeders that I keep. I have a transcribed playlist in my Apple Music library and a Notes app entry that I document timestamps in. So basically, when I want to transcribe a solo or a line, I put it in the playlist and then document the like little timestamp of where that line happens. Additionally, I keep a repertoire list of tunes that I know, tunes that I sort of know and like could learn with good review, and tunes that I don't know. Things like that just help you not lose steam when you're getting into a good routine. Step 3. Practice and refine. The aim of the first 2 steps is to make step 3 as simple and clear as possible, because it can be the most challenging one. I want you to remind yourself that at this point, all that's required is for you to sit down and execute the plan you set for yourself. You set a plan out of care for yourself. It does not require any additional ambition or self-judgment, just your trust in and commitment to yourself. So, sitting down to practice. Begin by reading through your practice mantra and deciding the specific exercise or piece of music you will work on. Tell yourself, I will practice for at least 5 minutes. This is a trick I learned from Effortless Mastery. The idea being that 5 minutes is a minimum threshold to get engaged in an activity, and more than likely, you won't want to stop once you get to 5 minutes, and it will turn into 10, 20, or even a half an hour. Even if it doesn't, you practice for 5 minutes, which is better than absolutely nothing. For longer sessions, consider something like the Pomodoro technique, where you mix 25 minutes of focused practice with a 5-minute break. We only have so much energy and attention in our days, and breaks will help you re-energize and refocus. Lastly, at the conclusion of your practice session, write down what you worked on and be specific. The next time you practice, you will read through your mantra and your last practice entry and pick up precisely where you left off. This helps build continuity over time. Our last step is to check in and refine. Set a date once per month to check in with yourself. Read through your practice journal from your mantra to your day-to-day logs. Note what seemed to progress and what took more time, and remind yourself that none of this is necessarily good or bad, or even a reflection of your work or character, but rather important information about how you learn. Here are a few considerations. Make note of any big wins. The positive affirmation of your work will go a long way in encouraging you in the future. Very gently, consider what areas you made less progress than anticipated in, and consider what improvements might be worth making for the next round. Assess whether you took on too much material, not enough, or just enough. Lastly, rewrite your mantra, including any updates you might have, on the next page and head into your next round of practice. Basically, rinse and repeat. In the interest of being practical, I wanted to offer a glimpse into my own practice journal at the moment. So currently I'm using an app called GoodNotes that a friend recommended that you can basically just keep digital notebooks in. And there's a few things that I do. So the first thing we talked about was the practice mantra. I rewrite it month to month. So for February, it was improve my tone and time, learn tunes, and transcribe solos based on my current goals. In the following pages, I have my first feeder, which is a list of 100 tunes rather. These are all jazz standards that I've kind of let go by the wayside, to be totally honest. So the orange ones are ones that I used to know very well but haven't played in years. The green ones are ones that I actively know now. And the yellow ones are ones that I'm learning. And the cool thing with GoodNotes is that I can actually import lead sheets into this. So really, I just need my iPad and my instrument wherever I go to practice. So sometimes I'm practicing at my apartment, sometimes it's at my teaching studio, and occasionally I do still tour and go on the road, so it's nice to just have one thing to bring with me. Let me go to a recent practice entry. I will do this one. This is from this past week. So I did 3 things. I warmed up with a rhythmic long tone exercise that I can explain more in a future video maybe. I reviewed the melody and did some choruses on Out of Nowhere and Beautiful Love. I listed the keys, D major and D minor, respectively, and the tempos, 120 BPM. And I transcribed a Jackie McLean line from a tune called Hip Strut and took it through 12 keys. And I even noted what keys felt more familiar and what felt more unfamiliar. Essentially, I will review this again in a couple of days when I get to March 1st, and I will revisit my mantra and see what I need to change for next month around. But my couple observations I can give is, one, that this first thing, the rhythmic long tone exercise, essentially is just taking long tones and giving you a time constraint. I feel that regular long tones can be very abstract, but if I said, I'm going to play half notes, that gives me a firm and distinct attack of my note and cutoff of my note. And I really want to treat this like I'm opening up a vent, really. So the sound just cleanly starts and stops with perfect tone all the way through, and simultaneously kind of helps me keep good time. After about 2 or 3 weeks of playing this, I'm finally seeing it kind of pop up in my playing more so, where when I play a melody of a tune, I'm finding that they sing quite a bit more and I have a bit more sustain with everything. So that one took a bit longer. But something like these two tunes, I knew these tunes when I was about 18 and 19 years old, and I played them a lot then, but I haven't really kept them in practice. And it only took me about 3 days to get those back into my playing. So now I have them memorized and I can play multiple choruses on them. I can speed them up and slow them down. I know the melodies really well. I can play them on piano. So things like that take a little bit less time. Even further, this line I transcribed from Jackie McLean, it took me about 3 days to get it comfortable and then about 5 days to get it internalized. So what I did was I learned the line by ear, practiced it in its given key, and then over time added a few keys per day until eventually on this day I was at 12 keys. And I noticed that once I took it through 12 keys for multiple days, I would start to hear bits and pieces of it come out when I was improvising, meaning that it was becoming a part of my vocabulary. So that takes even a bit longer than the tunes did, but less than the rhythmic long tones did. So everything kind of operates on its own timetable. And when I document this stuff, I kind of become more aware of how much time these things take. So yeah, I hope that was helpful in showing you a very practical version of this exercise. In wrapping this piece up, I do want to articulate that I don't think there is such thing as a perfect practice plan. Life is constantly in flux, and there will be times when we fall short on our priorities. Regardless, putting a plan into effect helps us recalibrate and get back on track when things happen. Just remember to be kind to yourself and patient with yourself. As the late Leonard Bernstein wisely said, to achieve great things, 2 things are needed: a plan and not quite enough time. If you made it this far into the video, I thank you dearly. I have received kind of an overwhelming amount of support over the last 2 weeks, and I kind of can't believe it, to be honest. I've worked at music for the majority of my life, so it's very rewarding to see that I'm actually reaching people in a meaningful way. If you would like to support my work, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. That helps me kind of stay relevant in the YouTube omnisphere. And if you want to dive a little bit deeper, there is a written version of this piece on my Substack that I post 1 week before these videos come out. And lastly, a lot of folks have been asking where to check out my music. I have 5 records, a bunch of EPs, and some singles out. All of my platforms are linked in the description, so if you use like Spotify or Apple Music or Bandcamp or whatever, you can find them all there. But yeah, overall, thank you all so much, and I will see you next time.